February 12, 2017, 188,000 people received the only order that mattered: leave everything behind and run for your lives right now. No sirens were loud enough to drown out the fear as families packed their entire lives into suitcases, abandoned their homes, and fled the rising wall of water. This was not a scene from a high-budget Hollywood disaster movie, but a terrifying reality in California, the richest state in the wealthiest nation on our entire planet. Look at this footage, where the massive concrete spillway is being ripped apart like wet cardboard as thousands of tons of brown water explode into the valley below. But what if I told you that the collapsing spillway was actually the least of their worries, and that a much darker secret was hiding deep inside the dam? Today is April 9th, 2026, and the highest dam in the United States is still leaking, despite the government spending over $1.1 billion on repairs. In this video, we will reveal why $1 billion cannot buy true safety, why the mountain is crying from within, and why 27 million people are still sleeping. Under the shadow of a massive water bomb that could detonate at any moment, we must ask if the authorities are telling us the whole truth about Oroville. We are diving deep into the structural rot, the ignored warnings, and the engineering nightmare that makes this concrete giant the most dangerous ticking time bomb in North America. Stay with me as we uncover the terrifying physics of how a dam fails and why the next disaster might be impossible for anyone to outrun or survive. Imagine the weight of 3.5 million acre-feet of water pressing against a wall that is slowly being hollowed out by invisible forces we cannot even see. Every second counts as we peel back the layers of deception and examine the catastrophic flaws that were baked into the design over 60 years ago by hopeful engineers. You need to understand that when a dam this size fails, it does not just leak, it disappears, sending a 90-foot wave that erases everything in its path, from the silent sensors that no longer work to the mysterious green spots appearing on the dry slope. The signs of a coming collapse are everywhere if you look. This is the story of the Oroville Dam, the leaking monster, and the desperate race against time to prevent the greatest engineering disaster in the history of the world. We will expose the political face-saving, the corner-cutting, and the raw power of nature that refuses to be tamed by concrete, steel, or even $1 billion. Completed in 1968, the Oroville Dam was hailed as the crown jewel of California's engineering, a towering achievement that promised to quench the thirst of millions for many generations. Standing at a staggering 770 feet tall, this massive structure is even higher than the legendary Hoover Dam, making it the tallest dam in the entire United States. The main spillway alone stretches over 3,000 feet in length and is nearly 180 feet wide, sloping down 500 feet toward the violent Feather River below. 8 massive steel radial gates control the flow of water, allowing engineers to release massive amounts of liquid energy to prevent the reservoir from ever overflowing during the heavy winter rains. When the project was finished, all of California celebrated because this was the vital heart of the state water project, providing life-sustaining water to over 27 million people every day. However, there is a deadly paradox buried beneath the glory, because that impressive height of 770 feet is not actually a symbol of safety, but a potential death sentence. Unlike the solid concrete walls of the Hoover Dam, Oroville is an earth-fill dam, constructed primarily from layers of compacted soil, rock, and gravel rather than a single massive block. Earth-fill dams do not hold back water with sheer structural stiffness. Instead, they rely on the immense weight and density of their clay core to create an impermeable barrier against the lake. The ultimate enemy of this design is a phenomenon known as piping, where water finds a tiny path through the soil and begins to slowly hollow out the dam from the inside. This internal erosion is terrifying because it can cause a total structural collapse within just a few hours, often without showing any visible warning signs on the outside of the dam. Think of it like a giant rock that looks perfectly solid on the outside, while thousands of invisible ants are eating away the core until the entire mountain suddenly turns into dust. This is exactly what experts fear is happening at Oroville right now, as the water continues to probe for weaknesses within the very foundation that supports billions of tons of pressure. If the core of the highest dam in America is compromised, the weight of the water above will become its own destroyer, turning 770 feet of pride into liquid chaos. To understand how we got to this point, we must look at the fatal mistakes made during the original construction and the warnings that were ignored for over 50 long years. The catastrophic failure of 2017 did not happen by accident, but was actually the result of a fatal decision made over 60 years ago by the original dam planners. Back in the 1960s, geologists wrongly labeled the foundation as hard rock, when in reality it was deeply weathered and weak enough to be eroded by mere water pressure. For decades, engineers noticed cracks in the concrete spillway and simply patched them with epoxy, never bothering to ask why the foundation underneath was shifting so much every single year. On February 7, 2017, high-velocity water found its way through those tiny cracks and began building up immense pressure beneath the heavy concrete slabs of the main spillway chute. The pressure became so great that it actually lifted the massive concrete slabs right off the ground, causing them to shatter like glass under the force of the roaring floodwaters. What happened next was even more terrifying, as the water began eating away the hillside, moving backward toward the main gates in a dangerous process that engineers call head-cutting erosion. With the main spillway destroyed, authorities were forced to use the emergency spillway for the first time ever. But they soon realized the unpaved hillside was washing away dangerously fast. If that hillside had eroded just a few feet further, the entire concrete lip would have collapsed, releasing an unstoppable wall of water onto the unsuspecting towns located directly below. But while the world watched the crumbling spillway, an even scarier crisis was happening inside the dam, because all of the critical pressure sensors had been broken for many years. Imagine driving a massive truck down a steep mountain road at night with no brakes and no headlights, because that is exactly how the engineers felt without their sensor data. Strange patches of lush green vegetation began appearing on the dry downstream slope of the dam, suggesting that water was already leaking through the core and feeding those plants. Federal regulators had warned about these leaks as early as 2014, yet no urgent action was taken to fix the aging heart of the tallest dam in the United States. The core of an earth dam must remain solid to be safe, but when water starts carving internal tunnels, it creates a ticking time bomb that cannot be easily stopped. Engineers found that the drainage system meant to handle this seepage was almost completely clogged with minerals and debris, leaving the internal pressure with nowhere to go but up. Every time the water level rose, the pressure against the weakened foundation increased, turning a simple infrastructure project into a deadly game of Russian roulette for the entire valley. The truth is that Oroville was suffering from a systematic decay that was hidden behind a facade of greatness, until the record-breaking rains of 2017 finally stripped it away. As the hillside continued to vanish and the spillway disintegrated, the lives of nearly 200,000 people hung by a single thread of remaining concrete and sheer luck. We must now ask how many other dams are hiding similar fatal flaws, waiting for a single rainy season to reveal the terrifying truth about the ground beneath our feet. Suppose the Oroville Dam were to fail completely and without warning. What would actually happen in the next 30 hours to the millions of people living in the path of the water? At 0 hour, the massive earth structure collapses under its own weight, sending a wall of water over 90 feet high crashing into the small town of Oroville, located just below. Within just a few minutes, the entire city of 21,000 people would be wiped off the map, as houses, cars, and trees are crushed by the sheer weight of the flood. 30 minutes later, the Feather River transforms into a violent torrent of mud and debris, moving south toward the fertile plains of the Sacramento Valley at a truly terrifying speed. By the 6-hour mark, the water reaches the heart of California's agricultural powerhouse, destroying the most productive farmland in the nation and drowning millions of dollars in crops and livestock. 30 hours into the catastrophe, the floodwaters reach the state capital, Sacramento, submerging the homes of over 500,000 residents under 30 feet of cold, dark, and debris-filled water. But the destruction of the capital city is only the beginning of a massive domino effect that would paralyze the entire state and damage the global economy for many years. The State Water Project, which is the largest water delivery system in the world, would be severed instantly, leaving over 27 million people in Southern California without their primary water source. Millions of acres of farmland in the Central Valley would lose irrigation, leading to a massive collapse of the national food supply and causing food prices to skyrocket across the globe. California represents the fifth largest economy on Earth, and a disaster of this scale would bring international trade to a complete standstill, affecting millions who have never heard of Oroville. No government agency has officially released the final cost of a total dam failure because the numbers are simply too terrifying for the public to hear or even imagine. Independent experts estimate the material damages would exceed hundreds of billions of dollars, but the true human cost and loss of life would be impossible for any accountant to calculate. This is not just a local problem for one valley, but a national security threat that could permanently change the future of the American West and the global financial system. The nightmare scenario of a collapsing Oroville Dam is the ultimate warning of what happens when we ignore the power of nature and the crumbling bones of our aging infrastructure. We must visualize the scale of this destruction to understand why every single crack in that concrete wall matters more than the temporary political pride of the people in power. Today is April 10th, 2026, and after spending $1.1 billion and 2 million labor hours, the massive concrete spillway has finally been rebuilt to modern standards. New pressure sensors are currently being installed throughout the structure, yet the system remains incomplete, leaving some engineers worried that we are still flying blind in several critical areas. Government regulators officially declare the dam safe to operate, but they continue to list a long series of risk reduction projects that still require hundreds of millions in additional funding. If you ask independent experts who have nothing to lose, they will tell you a much different story about the hidden vulnerabilities that still remain deep within the mountain's foundation. Oroville is not an isolated case, as the United States currently has over 92,000 dams, with an average age of 65 years, far exceeding their original design life expectancy. By the year 2030, 7 out of 10 dams across the entire nation will have surpassed their intended lifespan, creating a massive ticking time bomb for the next generation. Nearly 17,000 of these structures are classified as high hazard, meaning that if they fail, people will die, and the surrounding communities will be completely destroyed within several hours. Experts say we need at least $165 billion for repairs, but the government has only allocated $20 billion for the next decade of infrastructure maintenance. That leaves an astronomical gap of $145 billion, and every single year that we wait, the cost of fixing these aging giants only continues to grow higher. We spent over $1 billion to fix the Oroville spillway, which is 10 times more than the amount engineers originally requested to prevent the disaster before it ever happened. If the authorities had spent just $100 million on simple maintenance years ago, 188,000 people would not have had to flee for their lives that day. Oroville was not a natural disaster or an unpredictable accident, but rather the logical result of 60 long years of looking away from what we did not want to see. Now we must ask the most important question of all. Out of 92,000 dams across the nation, which one will be the next Oroville to fail and destroy everything? Please comment below if you believe this billion-dollar project was designed to save lives or simply to save the political face of those who ignored the warnings for decades. And if you live near a large dam, do you actually know what year it was built, and if the foundation beneath your home is truly safe from the monster?